Some bags earn their price tag, others just borrow one for a season. 8 bags on this list are quietly outperforming brands charging 4 times more, and 3 are doing the opposite, hiding behind a logo while the stitching gives up underneath. We check the leather, the hardware, and the seams that nobody bothers to inspect before checkout. Some of these names will surprise you, and a few will make you walk straight back to the clearance rack tomorrow. We are naming names, starting with the bag that should embarrass the department store next door. Number 8. Vince Camuto. Vince Camuto built a name on accessible designer energy, and the TJ Maxx clearance racks have been unusually kind to this brand for years now. This is exactly why it earns the 8th spot on this list, rather than landing closer to the bottom. The leather used across Vince Camuto's structured totes and crossbody styles is frequently a genuine pebbled cowhide, not the bonded leather substitute that shows up at lower price points, and that single material choice changes everything about how the bag ages over time. Pebbled leather hides scuffs the way smooth leather never could, which means a bag that picks up the normal scratches of daily use still looks presentable a year later, instead of showing every scrape like a diary nobody asked to read. The hardware is where this brand earns real respect. The zipper pulls and clasp closures are frequently a solid metal rather than a plastic core dipped in gold paint, and that distinction matters more than most shoppers realize standing at the register. Plastic hardware dipped in finish wears through at the edges within months, exposing a dull gray underneath that instantly ages a bag by several years. Solid metal just keeps looking like solid metal, season after season, with 0 exceptions. The stitching at the strap drop, the point where a removable crossbody strap clips into the bag's body, is also reinforced with a metal D-ring rather than a simple fabric loop sewn directly into the seam. That detail sounds small until you have actually watched a fabric loop fray apart under the weight of a loaded bag, at which point the strap simply falls away entirely, usually in public, usually at the worst possible moment. At $40 to $70 on the TJ Maxx floor, against an original retail price north of $150, Vince Camuto is delivering construction that genuinely punches above its discount price tag. The bag that takes this exact formula, the genuine leather, the real hardware, and applies it with even more consistency across an entire collection, is sitting just one spot above it, and the gap between the two brands is smaller than you would expect. Number 7. Kate Spade. Kate Spade occupies a strange and wonderful position on the TJ Maxx floor, because this is a brand whose full retail price regularly clears $300, and yet the construction standard barely changes between what shows up on the department store shelf and what shows up folded between 2 unrelated brands on a clearance rack. The signature crosshatch and Saffiano leather textures used across Kate Spade's most popular silhouettes are not just a style choice. That textured finish is engineered specifically to resist visible scratching, which means the bag survives the inside of a cluttered purse, keys, pens, the chaos of daily life, in a way that smooth leather bags simply do not. A scuff that would leave a permanent mark on a glossy finish just disappears into the texture here, almost like the leather was designed by someone who actually owns a bag and uses it. The interior construction is where this brand quietly separates itself from nearly everything else on this list. Kate Spade lines its bags with a structured fabric reinforced at the seams, rather than the thin, unlined pocket fabric that tears within a season at brands charging a fraction of the price. That reinforcement means the inside of the bag holds its shape years into ownership, instead of collapsing into a shapeless sack the moment you start carrying anything heavier than a wallet and a phone. The base of the bag, almost always the first place a poorly built tote begins to sag, is frequently reinforced with a stiffened panel stitched into the lining rather than left to rely on the leather alone for shape. That panel is the difference between a bag that stands upright on a counter years into ownership and a bag that slowly slumps into a puddle of its former self. The way so many lower-tier totes eventually do once gravity and time have their way. At $60 to $100 on the discount floor, against an original retail price that regularly sits 3 to 4 times higher, Kate Spade is arguably the single best dollar-for-dollar argument on the entire TJ Maxx accessories floor, and that is before factoring in resale value, which holds up remarkably well years after purchase compared to almost every other brand on this list. If this ranking is already making you rethink what is hanging in your closet, hit that like button and subscribe right now, because we go exactly this deep into the brands quietly worth your money every single week. Number 6. Coach is the name that built the entire premise of this list, because finding an authentic Coach bag at a TJ Maxx price point feels less like a discount and more like a small heist, and the construction underneath generally justifies every bit of that feeling. Coach's leather sourcing has remained remarkably consistent across decades, using a full-grain or pebbled leather depending on the collection, both of which are genuinely durable hide types that resist the cracking and peeling that plagues lower-tier synthetic alternatives. The brand's signature canvas and leather combination pieces use a coated canvas that resists water and staining considerably better than an all-leather bag would on its own, which makes the bag more practical for daily use than its premium appearance would suggest at first glance. The stitching density at the seams and handle attachment points is where Coach separates itself most clearly from nearly every brand ranked below it on this list. Reinforced box stitching at the handle base distributes the weight of a fully loaded bag across multiple points of contact, rather than concentrating that stress on a single seam the way cheaper construction does. That detail is invisible until the day a handle on a lesser bag tears loose under the weight of a laptop and a water bottle, and a Coach handle simply does not. The zippers themselves, frequently sourced from established hardware manufacturers rather than an unbranded generic supplier, glide smoothly for years without the catching and sticking that cheaper zipper tracks develop once dust and lint work their way into the mechanism. A sticking zipper might sound like a minor annoyance, but it is usually the very first sign that a bag's hardware was never built to last in the first place, and Coach simply does not produce that warning sign. At $80 to $130 on the discount floor, against an original retail price that frequently exceeds $350, Coach represents one of the most dramatic discounts relative to construction quality on this entire list. The next brand takes a completely different path to earning its spot here, leaning not on leather at all, but on a material most shoppers walk straight past without realizing what they are actually looking at. Number 5. Tory Burch. Tory Burch shows up twice in this channel's research this month, once on the shoe list where the brand's sole construction quietly let down a recognizable name, and once right here where the handbag side of the business tells an almost entirely different and far more flattering story. The leather uppers used across Tory Burch's structured totes and the brand's signature Saffiano leather crossbody bags are a genuinely substantial cut, considerably thicker than the leather used in the brand's footwear line. And that thickness translates directly into a bag that resists creasing and sagging at the corners far longer than a thinner hide would under identical daily use. The Saffiano texture specifically is cross-hatched and pressure-treated during tanning, a process that makes the surface naturally scratch-resistant in a way few other leather finishes can match at any price point. The hardware on Tory Burch's bags, the Riva logo medallion, the turnlock closures, is frequently a solid brass base with a gold tone plating applied through an electroplating process rather than a thin spray coating, which means the gold finish survives years of zipper pulls and clasp use before showing the dulling that cheaper hardware exhibits within a single season. The shoulder strap drop on Tory Burch's crossbody styles is adjustable through a buckled leather tab rather than a fixed chain link, and that leather tab is double-stitched at both ends, a small reinforcement that prevents the exact strap failure documented at the bottom half of this list, where a single weak attachment point eventually gives out under the ordinary weight of daily carry At $100 to $180 at TJ Maxx, against an original retail price regularly above $350, Tory Burch's handbag line earns back nearly all the trust its own shoe division spent the last list losing. The next bag on this list comes from a brand built entirely around the idea that a quilted leather bag should last long enough to become a family heirloom, and the construction underneath backs that promise up completely. Number 4. Michael Kors. Michael Kors built an empire on accessible luxury branding, and while the brand's outlet-specific product lines have earned a complicated reputation among handbag enthusiasts in recent years, the inventory that actually lands on TJ Maxx shelves tends to skew toward the brand's better-constructed mainline pieces rather than the outlet-exclusive lower tier. The Saffiano and pebbled leather options across Michael Kors's most popular silhouettes use a genuine leather hide treated with a protective coating that resists water spotting, a detail that matters considerably more than it sounds for anyone who has ever set a bag down on a damp restaurant floor without thinking twice about it. That coating does not just sit on the surface either. It is bonded into the leather's top grain during finishing, which means it survives years of handling rather than wearing away after the first few months the way a cheaper topical spray finish would. The interior compartmentalization on Michael Kors structured totes and satchels is genuinely thoughtful, with reinforced dividers and zippered pockets stitched directly into the lining rather than simply glued on as an afterthought. That stitched construction means the pockets hold their shape and their position inside the bag for years, instead of sagging loose and bunching at the bottom, the way glued pocket linings tend to within a single season of regular use. The base feet on Michael Kors's structured satchels, the small protective studs along the bottom edge that keep the leather from sitting directly on a floor or sidewalk, are frequently a metal core rather than a plastic nub that flattens and wears smooth within a year. That tiny detail keeps the bag's bottom panel protected from direct scuffing for considerably longer than a bag without that reinforcement, which matters more than it sounds the moment a bag gets set down on a subway platform or a restaurant floor without a second thought. At $70 to $120 on the discount floor, against an original retail price that typically sits between $250 and $350, Michael Kors delivers a construction standard that the TJ Maxx price tag does not remotely reflect. The next brand on this list barely advertises at all, relying instead on a multi-generational reputation that the bags themselves have to earn all over again with every single stitch. Number 3. Dooney and Bourke. Dooney and Bourke has operated since 1975 with a manufacturing philosophy that has changed remarkably little across 5 decades, and that consistency shows up directly in the construction of bags that frequently land at TJ Maxx for a fraction of their boutique price. The brand's signature all-weather leather and the heavier-grade cowhide used across its core satchel and tote lines are genuinely substantial materials, considerably thicker than the leather used by several brands ranked above it on this list, and that thickness alone accounts for a meaningful share of the bag's resistance to sagging under daily weight. A thicker hide simply holds its structural shape longer than a thin one, the same way a sturdier cardboard box holds its corners better than a flimsy one under identical weight. The hand-stitch detailing along the handles and base seams on Dooney and Bourke's higher-end lines is something almost nothing else on this list can claim at a comparable discount price. Hand stitching, while slower and more expensive to produce than machine stitching, distributes stress unevenly in a way that is actually beneficial, allowing the seam to flex slightly under load rather than snapping cleanly along a single rigid stitch line the way uniform machine stitching sometimes does under sudden strain. The brand's leather is also vegetable tanned in many of its core lines rather than chemically processed, which means it develops a softness and a richness in color the longer it gets used, instead of cracking and drying out the way chemically tanned leather eventually does once it loses its original conditioning treatment. At $60 to $100 at TJ Maxx, Against a boutique retail price that frequently exceeds $200, Dooney and Bourke offers a genuinely old-school construction standard, hiding inside a thoroughly modern discount price point. The next brand on this list takes hand-finished construction even further, building bags in small batches using a process most shoppers assume only exists at price points several multiples higher than what TJ Maxx is actually charging. Number 2. Patricia Nash. Patricia Nash built its entire brand identity around vegetable-tanned leather and old-world craftsmanship. And unlike several flashier names on this list, the construction underneath the romantic branding genuinely holds up to direct scrutiny once you actually examine the stitching and the hide. Vegetable-tanned leather develops a natural patina over time, rather than simply wearing down, which means a Patricia Nash bag carried daily for years does not look damaged the way a chemically tanned leather bag eventually does. It looks intentionally aged, the kind of worn-in character that high-end leather goods brands charge a significant premium for. Except here, it develops naturally through ordinary use, rather than being artificially distressed at the factory. The hardware finishes, frequently an antiqued brass or pewter tone rather than a bright polished gold, are chosen specifically because that matte antiqued finish does not show wear the way a shiny plated finish does. A bright gold zipper pull scratches and dulls visibly within months. An antiqued brass pull simply looks the same on day 1 and year 5 because there was never a shiny surface there to begin with that could wear away in the first place. The stitching pattern along the seams is frequently a contrasting top stitch rather than a hidden seam, a detail that is partly decorative but is also a quiet signal of confidence. A brand only puts its stitching on display when that stitching is consistent enough to survive being looked at closely for years, rather than tucked away where a slightly uneven seam could hide from view indefinitely. At $50 to $90 on the discount floor, against an original retail price, generally between $150 and $200, Patricia Nash might be the most underrated name on this entire list, mostly because the brand simply does not have the household name recognition that Coach or Kate Spade carries walking through the door. If this list is already changing how you shop the clearance racks, subscribe before we get to the top spot, because the bag earning the number 1 position on this list is doing something almost nobody else in this price range even attempts. Number 1. Brahmin earns the top spot on this list by applying a construction standard that most shoppers associate exclusively with European leather houses, charging 3 to 5 times more, and applying it consistently across nearly the brand's entire catalog, rather than reserving it for a single flagship style. The brand's signature croco-embossed leather is embossed using a heated plate process, pressed directly into a genuine, substantial leather hide, rather than printed onto a thin synthetic surface, the way cheaper embossed bags fake the same texture. That distinction matters enormously over time, because a printed texture on synthetic material flattens and peels within a year of regular use, while an embossed texture, pressed into real leather, simply softens slightly and keeps its definition for the life of the bag. The interior construction on Brahmin's structured totes and satchels uses a fully lined, reinforced base panel stitched directly to the bag's structural frame, which means the bag holds its shape, standing upright on a table even when it is empty. A small detail that instantly separates well-constructed bags from collapsing ones the moment you actually set them down somewhere. At $120 to $200 at TJ Maxx, against an original retail price that frequently clears $400, Brahmin delivers exactly the kind of construction this entire ranking has been built to identify. Real leather, real stitching, and a hardware standard that holds up to years of daily handling without the dulling, peeling, or sagging documented across nearly every brand ranked below it. 8 bags down, and every single one of them quietly outperforms its own discount price tag. The next 3 bags tell the opposite story. Names recognizable enough to make a shopper feel confident at checkout, construction quiet enough to fall apart long after the receipt gets thrown away. Number 3 to skip. Steve Madden. Steve Madden's handbag line follows almost the exact same pattern documented on this channel's footwear ranking. A brand that looks genuinely premium under store lighting while hiding construction shortcuts in the one place a shopper almost never checks before buying. The vegan leather, a polyurethane-based synthetic used across the bulk of Steve Madden's handbag range, is applied over a fabric base that cracks along the bag's natural fold points within months of regular use, producing the same visible white cracking lines documented across the brand's footwear reviews. That cracking shows up fastest at the corners and the base of the bag, exactly where the material flexes most during ordinary handling, which means the damage appears in the most visible possible location, rather than somewhere a bag could reasonably hide it. The hardware is frequently a lightweight zinc alloy, finished with a thin gold or silver plating that wears through to a dull gray base within a single season of daily zipper use. That wear pattern is almost identical to the plastic core hardware documented at the very bottom of the footwear list, just dressed up slightly more convincingly at the point of purchase, where a shopper examining the bag in store lighting genuinely cannot tell the difference between this and a bag with real metal hardware underneath. At $30 to $50 on the discount floor, Steve Madden is not pretending to be a long-term investment any more than Shein's footwear category was. And that honest pricing is the one thing working in the brand's favor here. The problem is the same problem documented across this entire ranking. A bag that looks considerably more expensive than it is invites a level of trust in daily use that the construction underneath was never actually built to support. If you think this is bad enough, you're in for a surprise. The next brand charges more than Steve Madden and fails in the exact same spot. The only difference is the price tag works harder to make you forget to check. Number 2. To skip. Jessica Simpson. Jessica Simpson's accessories line charges a price that sits noticeably above Steve Madden while delivering a remarkably similar construction underneath, which makes this the second brand on this list secretly falling apart behind a presentation expensive enough to make the shortcuts genuinely difficult to spot before you get the bag home. The synthetic leather used across the brand's most popular tote and satchel silhouettes is bonded to a thin, cardboard-stiffened interior frame rather than a flexible, properly reinforced structural lining, and that base begins to soften and lose its shape within a few months of being loaded with the normal contents of daily life: a wallet, keys, a water bottle. The ordinary weight any bag is expected to carry without complaint. The stitching at the handle attachment points uses a single-pass machine stitch with no reinforcement at the stress point where the handle actually meets the bag's body, which is precisely the spot where a heavily loaded bag puts the most consistent strain over time. That single stitch line eventually pulls loose at exactly that junction, and once it goes, the handle separates from the bag entirely rather than simply fraying at the edge, the way a properly reinforced seam would degrade more gracefully. At $40 to $70 on the discount floor, Jessica Simpson is charging a price increase over Steve Madden that the construction quality does not meaningfully justify once the two are compared component by component rather than judged on first impressions at the register. If this is changing how you look at the bags in your own closet right now, hit subscribe before the final bag on this list, because it carries one of the most recognizable names in accessible fashion, and the gap between that name and what the bag actually does after 6 months is the most uncomfortable comparison on this entire list. Number 1 to skip, Betsey Johnson. Betsey Johnson built a recognizable, playful brand identity around bold colors and statement hardware, and that visual personality is genuinely the strongest thing this brand has going for it, which makes the construction underneath all the more disappointing once you actually look past the embellishments. The faux leather and sequined fabric combinations used across the brand's most popular crossbody and shoulder bag silhouettes are bonded using an adhesive process nearly identical to the sole bonding method documented at the bottom of this channel's footwear ranking, and the failure pattern is almost identical too. Seams separate at stress points within the first few months of regular use, and the sequined or embellished sections shed individual pieces at a rate that turns the bottom of a handbag or the bottom of a car seat into a small glitter crime scene within weeks. The lining fabric is frequently a thin, unreinforced polyester that tears at the seams almost immediately once anything with sharp edges, keys, a phone case, a pen makes regular contact with the interior. That tearing exposes the bag's internal stiffening material directly. The exact failure point, documented across nearly every brand at the bottom of this entire ranking, just hidden inside a far more colorful and eye-catching exterior than Shein or Forever 21 ever bothered to offer. At $25 to $45, Betsey Johnson earns its position as the final brand to skip on this list for the same reason Shein earned the bottom spot on the footwear ranking. The price is honest about what you are actually buying, even if the bold styling makes it easy to forget that honesty the moment you spot it on the clearance rack. 11 bags, ranked by one standard only: what the construction underneath the leather, or the leather substitute, actually delivers relative to what you paid for it. The next time you are standing at a TJ Maxx accessories wall, deciding whether a bag is worth pulling off the rack, check the inside seams before you check the price tag. That single detail will tell you more about what is about to live on your shoulder for the next 5 years than the logo on the front ever will. Click the next video on your screen, because what we found there about the shoes hiding in your closet right now changes how you should be thinking about your entire wardrobe budget, not just what is hanging from it.